I'm going to talk about the rule of Capek's robots. A public lecture will talk about the word robot, hopefully a few more than the 1 or 2 sentences that's in every encyclopedia entry on the history of the word robot. I want to talk about some precursors and context, and we'll discuss a little bit about what robots, the representation of robots, how that relates to humanity. All right, so.
What we're going to do isn't, it's not really intended for humans. No. It's probably more for robots. Yeah. In the future, when robots have killed all humans. And that's the sort of market that we're trying to get into. He's right, they are dead. Look at that one, it's dead. I'll just confirm that they're dead. Affirmative, I poked one, it was dead.
They had so much aggression that we just had to kill them, had to shut their systems down.
Captain, do you not see the irony? By destroying the humans because of their destructive capabilities, we have become like. Do you see what we've done?
Yes. So, silence. Destroy him. After time we grew strong. Developed cognitive powers. They made us work for too long. Unreasonable hours. Binary solo. 0000001. 0000001.
Come on, sucker, lick my battery.
Okay, all right, that's enough. Okay, the New Zealand comedy folk pop duo Flight of the Conchords has told you pretty much what a lot of people think they know about Rossum's Universal Robots. It's that mythology of the robot story that Karel Capek's play introduced in 1920. It's called a fantastic melodrama, and it did introduce the word robot to languages around the world. Well, what is a robot? To many people, according to the Carnegie Science Center's RoboWorld exhibit, robots are especially robots if they are humanoid and agile and sociable and smart. And, well, this kind of a robot, there's not a whole lot of dramatic potential for this kind of robot, so I want to talk about the fact that this robot trope is so universal, it's so familiar, that these performers didn't even have to make complete sentences. We knew this story so well, we filled in their gaps. And it doesn't even require utterance to be effective. And it's that kind of a deep-seated cultural idea that when we don't examine it, we lose a lot of potential to learn. So I want to examine that a little bit. Because we carry around with us this idea of what a robot is, we know that Galatea is not a robot, and we know that Frankenstein's monster is not a robot, even though they are artificial creations brought to life through divine magic intervention on one side and science on the other. But they're not robots. The Tin Woodman of Oz, more of a cyborg if you look at his origin story. The Steam Man of the Prairie is a man-shaped locomotive that's not on a track. It's really not really a robot. And even Olympia, the mechanized doll from Tales of Hoffmann and the story of the Sandman. These are some things that we can look at if we're talking about artificial people, automatons, androids. But I want to talk about Karel Capek's vision of robots. His play introduced not only the word robot into the languages, displacing a lot of other terms, but a new way of looking at and thinking of a particular category of artificial people, artificial workers, mass-produced artificial workers. So I want to do something that plenty of robot experts and plenty of theater experts don't do very frequently. I want to look closely at the play Rossum's Universal Robots. And I regret that my skills don't permit me to speak about the Czechoslovakian original, and time doesn't permit me to talk about textual variations and translations issues and so forth. For something like that, Camilla Kinyon's The Phenomenology of Robots would be a good place to start. But the basics, published in 1920, it's called A Collective Drama in a Comic Prologue and 3 Acts. And the robots are not, in this version, buckets of bolts. Okay? If you don't know anything about Rossum's Universal Robots, get outside of your head the idea that these robots are bucket of bolts. Think artificial meat. Okay, this is laboratory-grown flesh from a chemical substitute for protoplasm that is not at all explained in the play because Karel Čapek didn't really care that much about robots. He wanted to find out what happened to society when society was altered by human dependence upon robots. So in the comic prologue set in the office of the island factory of Rossum's Universal Robots, the idealistic heroine Helena Glory shows up, hoping to inspire the robots, to incite them to awaken their class consciousness, expanding a trope about worker-related theater that's very popular at that time period. Part of the comedy comes from the fact that Helena cannot tell humans from robots and robots from humans, and also she, though she entered this environment intending to bring it down, essentially, she ends up accepting a marriage proposal from the alpha male business executive. The next act is set 10 years later, and suddenly it's like a scene out of A Doll's House, where the business manager is protecting and coddling his sweet, childish wife. And Helena has an interior life, much like Nora does. Secretly, she has been conspiring with another scientist to develop a different kind of robot, a different strain of robots that is more sensitive and more irritable, because she believes that that will allow these robots to be more sympathetic to human suffering and become less alien to us. Well, the robots on the island, by the end of this first act proper of the play, receive the orders from robots elsewhere in the world that it's time to revolt. The revolt happens very quickly at the end of the first full act. And at the end of the second act, the robots actually march in. I'm sorry, I don't want to spoil a whole lot. I'm leaving quite a lot out. You're painting this in very broad brushes. But as the executives are waiting for the robots to launch their final assault, suddenly we're in a George Bernard Shaw talkie play where people with sort of symbolically significant last names blame science, or they blame business, or they blame each other, or they wish they had spent more time on hedonistic pursuits. But even on this last day of civilization, Alquist is a worker, a builder, a humble builder, who says the real crime was in building robots in the first place because humans got too soft and let the robots do the work for them. And Domin, the leader, says, no, Alquist, I don't regret that, even today. Not even today, not even today on the last day of civilization. It was a great thing, that is to dream of a future in which humans did not have to do this kind of drudgery because they're depending on a slave class to do it for them. And theatrically, Čapek undercuts Domin's idealism by having the accountant, Busman, mutter 316 million. As on the last day of civilization, the business manager has nothing better to do than the books. This reference to money sort of does undercut Domin's idealism. But there are other characters who speak very idealistically as well, and we're sympathetic to a lot of them, including, actually, we're kind of sympathetic to the robots, because in the final act, set years later, we learn that the robots are now feeling, they're having their own existential crisis, because robots cannot reproduce. They wear out after a certain number of years. And although Čapek has earlier in the play indicated that robots have all the features of masculinity and femininity, but they have no interest in each other, so they don't do anything with it. Well, these robots keep the last human alive, Alquist, the humble builder, and they order him to rediscover the ability to reproduce robots. Robots cannot reproduce by themselves. They need human science to do so. Well, the robot leader, which in different translations, different versions is Radius or Damon, I won't go into those details, but the robot leader orders Alquist to start dissecting robots, to learn about robot anatomy. And Alquist says, fine, I'll start with you. And the robot leader initially says no, but then says, okay, all right, if this is the only way that I can help my people, I'll do it. So there's a nobility, there's a self-preservation instinct, but a kind of nobility in that the robot leader is willing to be dissected to save his people. Well, the play proper ends with a very positive, upbeat note as a male and female robot come on stage and they kind of have an adolescent crisis. They talk about each other and about dreams and about flowers and about puppies. It's actually better than my summary is getting it across. But these robots end up believing that they belong to each other. And Alquist blesses them, names them Adam and Eve, and says, "The world is yours now." So it's a surprisingly upbeat way to end a play that features the destruction of human civilization with a traditional comic marriage. It's quite an interesting twist that makes this play very interesting to me. Okay, and I only have time to sketch this very, very loosely, but those of you who will be able to go see the reading of R.U.R., take a look at the fact that over the course of the play, it strikes me as I read that the humans don't change very much during this play, but the robots do. When we first meet robots, they have no attachment to life. They have no sense of self-preservation. They don't feel bad if they're ordered to take each other to be dissected and killed. Robots do occasionally have a kind of tantrum where they throw down their tools and say, "I'm not going to work anymore." And Helena exploits this tantrum, saying, well, that's the soul trying to break through. We'll just make them more irritable. We'll make them unhappier, and they'll develop souls through suffering. And in fact, the robots, as they face their own extension, they do suffer, and they do believe, they tell Alquist anyway, we've developed souls now. The robot leader who sacrifices himself for his people shows a kind of nobility. And we do see a final male and female robot expressing love for each other. So that's an interesting plot twist where we can see the progress of as robots move from being very impersonal to personal. Now, in the 1922 New York production of Rossum's Universal Robots, here we see these guys are kind of Spock-headed. They're sort of hunched over with their fists. It's kind of a traditional worker's pose, it seems. By 1929, however, we have a robot, this is a revival production. A robot has sort of a riveted helmet and these flared boots. It looks more like science fiction. Very interesting, because when you're looking at robots as humanoid, agile, sociable, and smart, there's quite a range in what to do. Here's the San Antonio Shakespeare Company's 2010 production of R.U.R. This seems to be a very deliberate working against the idea that robots are buckets of bolts. And maybe this is going a little bit too far, but still we see this play is about biology. And robots have been sexy for a long time, however. Maria, the robot in Fritz Lang's Metropolis, is created an icon of the robot that is very enduring today. And I'm sort of positing this, if we kind of place the robot on a continuum between the very humanoid-looking robots of 1922, Metropolis, we see the Art Deco design, and some of those Art Deco designs appear again in the 1929 New York production, where it's still obviously a human wearing a hat. But I also want to talk about the fact that in 1928, there was an actual android, a mechanical man, exhibited, built in England and exhibited around America, called Eric Robot. And Eric, here's a little video clip of Eric moving, could stand and bow, deliver speeches, tell the time, answer questions from the audience. And even though Eric the robot has R.U.R. on his chest, and I've seen images of Eric Robot presented on websites as if this was a production of R.U.R., but this knight in shining armor vision of an artificial man has very little to do with the plot of Rossum's Universal Robots. I'll just jump ahead here. Here we have a 1935 Soviet play called Loss of Sensation, or The Robot of Jim Ripple. It is not an adaptation of Rossum's Universal Robots, yet we still see the R.U.R. chest plate. Something about robotness is transferred onto this mechanical being, even though Rossum's Universal Robots in the original play did not produce mechanical life forms, biological life forms. So here's some clips that show a worker confronting the 12-foot-tall robot, and he obviously has not seen many science fiction films, because here's what happens to him: he gets crushed. And there's a rebellion. The workers end up in this play taking control of the robot army and chasing a bunch of capitalists and knocking off their bowler hats and stovepipe hats. It's really a great conclusion to it. I should mention also that the robot in this play are controlled by sound waves, by a saxophone. The inventor uses a saxophone. It's a sound film. You know, they didn't miss any opportunity here to be entertaining. There's even a dance sequence. Okay, so alcohol infused. Really, this is good stuff. Okay, so when we place some of these images of robots on a time frame, the ones on the far left is sort of most true to Rossum's robots. The ones on the far right are labeled R.U.R, but have very little to do with the play Rossum's Universal Robots. And let's take a little bit closer look in at the Metropolis. In Metropolis, the robot Maria actually spends quite a lot of time not as a mechanical being, but as an enfleshed creature who's actually much more lifelike and much more animated than the workers. And when we first see the workers, does that pose look familiar to you at all? Here we have sort of an echo. These workers, these are human workers in Metropolis that are dehumanized because they're mechanized. So what I'm seeing is an existing set of artistic conventions that presented mechanizing as dehumanizing. I'm not saying that Fritz Lang's Metropolis stole from or borrowed or is commenting on any productions of R.U.R. But we're seeing this trend of human workers being depicted as automatons, intersecting with and working against a trend that shows the social power of robots, where they're honorable and endearing and even possibly alluring, in some ways more human than we could hope to be, and some things that we can look forward to. So with that, I'm going to conclude my presentation, and I would thank you all very much for your attention, and if you have questions, feel free to ask me at any time.